Welcome to everyone that has been patiently waiting for the presentation to start. I think we're just about there, and in a moment I will make my slides full screen so you won't be able to see the extra bits around the edges, and then we will get underway. We have 12 viewers with us tonight, so thanks everyone for spending your Saturday evening with me. I really hope that you find this interesting and informative and fun. A bit of a different way of delivering a forecast outlook here. Danielle asks, when does the new merch drop? Yeah, so that's really exciting. Next weekend. I'm really excited about this year's logo and motto. My sister, who's based in Chicago, graphic designer, is the designer, and I think she did a really cool job. Great job, and that'll all be out next weekend. So really looking forward to sharing that with everyone. All right, well, with that, I will kick things off once again. Thanks everyone for joining in from the Hudson Valley. I am streaming live from Auckland, New Zealand, some 8,500 miles away on the bottom of the Earth in the Southern Hemisphere. And I'm excited tonight to share with you my thoughts on the winter weather in the Hudson Valley. Of course, today, just looking at the weather, it was in the upper 60s, so we're not quite there yet, although we do have our first Arctic cold front of the autumn season, the fall, coming in the coming couple of days as we look ahead to Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. It's going to be on the chillier side. So it's a good time to talk winter weather. So welcome to everyone, and I will get underway with my presentation. So kind of before I go into the outlook, just a bit of a background on me, where I came from, what I do, why I'm in New Zealand. Yeah, my story is from New York to New Zealand. So I was born in Westchester County in 1991, and I lived there for a short while before moving up to the Hudson Valley, the Mid-Hudson Valley to be specific, where I lived briefly in Poughkeepsie when I was a baby, and then moved across the river to Orange County, where I spent my younger years and right up until I moved away to go to college. So I went to Valley Central School District, elementary school at Berea. Then I went to the middle school and the high school in Montgomery, and that really set me up well. The teachers there I found to be really fantastic, and I was well positioned to go and chase my main passion, which is meteorology. And that was a passion that I had since a very young age when it was really the blizzard of 1996. Maybe some of you may remember that. I think it was in January. Montgomery had probably, maybe 18 to 24 inches of snow. And I think we were off school for 2 or 3 days. And one of my first memories, just running to the window and just watching the snow kind of pile up and pile up and pile up. And that was a trigger for me to ultimately learn about the science behind the storms. So I took that passion to Valley Central, where I was as early as the middle school, kind of used to be asked, we're going to have school tomorrow. And at that point, I was an amateur. I was, looking at the different websites and just kind of, bringing those things together in my head. Whereas now, I've of course learned the ins and outs of forecasting and looking at different things, satellites, radars, weather models, and bringing that all together. So really, honed my skills at Oswego, graduated in 2013. In 2012, I had an internship with AccuWeather, which is located in State College, Pennsylvania. And that was after that successful internship, I was offered a full-time job after I graduated. So that was a really nice transition back to AccuWeather, where I had the internship, and there I worked shift work. So I was working sometimes in the same week. I'd be working overnights, and then I'd be working day shifts, evenings, and it was quite a tough thing. Obviously, being right out of school, I was energetic and I wanted to do everything. And it was a kind of like a grad school for forecasting. You learned how to forecast everywhere in the world, and certainly that was beneficial because a few years later, I was contacted by one of my former professors at Oswego about job openings in New Zealand, and he had lived there for about 2 years at the time, and they were hiring a couple new meteorologists. And I thought, well, this was if I'm gonna, ever do something really, really unusual, really unique, this is the time to do it. I was in my early to mid 20s, 24, I think, and I went through the application process, and one thing led to another, and there was a job offer. I'm like, wow, halfway around the world, you have to start over, new bank account, new friends, new everything, really, new, in some ways, a new language, of course, with the accent and all of that. So I took the job sight unseen, and here we are, almost 7 years later now. And it's been an awesome journey. I got married and have traveled New Zealand, a beautiful country. As you can see there, the picture that was from July at a place called Mount Cook, which is the New Zealand's tallest mountain. After we got there on a day that it had just snowed, this was my mom had visited, and my wife Kate was with us, and it was just a fantastic day. You don't always get to see it in just after a snowfall, so we were really lucky on the day that we were there. So that's my story, kind of in a nutshell. And as I said before, across oceans, time zones, bottom of the world, my kind of dedication to forecasting in the Hudson Valley, knows no bounds. What you'll see on the left is a picture of me during my honeymoon. We were standing on top of a glacier in New Zealand, and on the right is a picture of in the North Island, one place that it snows in kind of the central part of the North Island called the Central Plateau, with an ill-formed snowman there. But the snow here melts very fast. The sun is quite strong, and usually it only lasts for a couple of days, unless, of course, you are going to the top of a glacier, such as what you see on the left, which is in the bottom part of the South Island, where the glaciers and snow last year round if you get up high enough in the mountains. So you may be wondering, why I'm wearing shorts, but that was a bit of helicopter ride. And so it was warm in the helicopter. We just hopped out, and probably it was with the sun, it felt like it was in the 40s. So it wasn't too bad. But obviously it was a short time spent on top of the glacier there, and then we were right back in. So I didn't, of course, have any frostbite. And as you can see, it was a pretty sunny day. So I get to enjoy the snow, even though it does not snow where I live in Auckland. I do get to enjoy the snow in different parts of New Zealand. All right, so why you came here tonight is winter. The winter in the Hudson Valley, 2022, 23, and basically many people just want to know, is it going to be bad or not, right? Um, and it's a pretty complicated question. I wish I could just give you, a yes or no answer, but science, meteorology, forecasting is not typically that simple, that straightforward. So I try to break it down in a way that's really consumable. Giving the kind of high level summary, and then we'll dig into the why behind the weather, what's going to influence the patterns that we will see. So, a bit of a primer on what a winter outlook is versus kind of a weather forecast. So, when we're looking out many months into the future, so it's October now, and we're looking out really November through December, January, February, March, and April. Um, it's not a weather forecast because you can't really get those finer level details. I can't tell you, what the weather is going to be like, say, during the week of Christmas or the week of New Year's. That's actually not possible. And in that way, a seasonal forecast is very different because it's more about the themes that'll occur over several months or a season, right? Is it going to be colder than average, warmer than average, wetter, snowier, windier, that type of thing? And you can determine that over the course of, say, a longer time period, like a month or over a couple of months. But again, you're not able to say, it's going to snow on November 28th, December 10th, December 20th. That's actually not possible. So I kind of liken it to a jigsaw puzzle in a sense, and it's got a lot of pieces. and you put it together, and you're like hunting around for that one piece, that a couple of pieces that'll kind of complete the picture. But ultimately, there's going to be some gaps. And the picture, when you look out that far in advance, is going to be a bit fuzzy. But fortunately, we have the tools in the year 2022 to kind of be able to make out that theme. But at the end of the day, we have to remember that weather forecasting, climate forecasting is not perfect. Ultimately, there was a line that all forecasts are wrong and some forecasts are useful. So I'm kind of hoping to fall into that latter category, and hoping that you find this to be useful, and maybe help with your decision making or thought process as we go into the months ahead. And I should also say that this is actually what I do for a living in New Zealand. I actually spend more time looking at forecasts many months to seasons in advance rather than doing the shorter term weather forecasting. And this helps people basically plan and prepare for the seasons ahead, and kind of angle their businesses or their decision making or their thought process in such a way that they can use this guidance forecast information to better align themselves with the weather and conditions that are expected in the months ahead. So, kind of as I said earlier, and no, it's not possible to provide the Christmas Day nor Christmas week forecast months in advance. I actually get this question sometimes as early as August or September, um, but it's not possible. And that GIF in the bottom right is basically me every time I get this question at the end of summer or early in the fall, because it's just one of those things that at present time we don't have the ability to do, and I'm not sure we'll kind of ever have the ability to do, because weather forecasting is kind of something called an initial value problem, jargon there, but basically we have to understand what is happening now at present time in order to predict the future. And the farther you go out in time, the more random things become. And ultimately, we're not able to solve that problem more than, say, 7 to about 10 days into the future. And after that, it just becomes about pattern recognition and broad patterns of pressure around the world. And that then influences things like temperature, rainfall, and snowfall. Right. Well, shall we kick into it? The five things that you should know about winter 2022-23 in the Hudson Valley. So this is basically my high level overview of the winter season as I see it, and to come up with these five points. I've sifted through lots of information, climate models, historical years in the past that are similar to this year, and it's a lot of hours and time. In fact, I started doing this in August, so we're about 2 months into it, and here are kind of the five things that you'll want to know. So, I'm number one. I'm kind of keeping an eye on the potential for some spells of colder conditions during November and December, in particular. In fact, I've been watching November, the early to middle part of the month, for the potential for a colder than average kind of period, and we'll have to keep an eye on that for what it might mean in terms of snow. Um, However, it does look like maybe the early part of winter could be a little bit colder than the late part of winter, such as during January, February, and March. So that's kind of the first thing with temperatures. I don't think we're in for a record-setting winter in terms of cold, and probably not snow either, although there'll be our share of colder periods. All right. So we've seen the last couple of winters, it has gotten cold, it hasn't really lasted, and I think that will be kind of a similar theme for the upcoming winter. In terms of snowfall, November, December could go kind of boom or bust. I think it basically could go either way. If I had to kind of lean one way or the other, I'd probably go toward a little bit less snow in November and December overall. But sometimes, as we saw a few Novembers ago, you can get one big storm. I believe that was in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, that really sets the tenor for the season to come. So overall, and you'll see why later on, boomer bust, but kind of leaning toward less early on. And then as we go later in the season, I think January overall has the highest chances for being snowy. there's an interesting signal for February for having less snow. And February usually is our snowiest month on average in the Hudson Valley. So maybe a bit of a reduction in February. And then there's a bit of a signal for some spring snow. March having a sign of potentially being a bit snowier on the whole. So we have a kind of a couple of themes as we go through the season there. Unlikely to be wall to wall snowy, but a couple of months that stand out as potentially being snowier than normal. Now, another thing that we saw in recent winters is the chance for uh, mixed precipitation, icing, and we saw a pretty severe icing event last winter. And I do think that the setup this winter once again will favor higher odds for sleet and freezing rain, those ice events. So may start as snow, but then transition quickly to sleet and freezing rain. And that is something, yeah, once again, that we've seen the last few winters, and we may see again this winter due to the storm track kind of coming in from the west rather than moving up the coast. So I know that icing is something that schools really keep a close eye on because when it comes to ice, don't think twice. So we often see really a lot of caution taken around those icing events, and I expect to see some of those again this coming winter. So number four, kind of on the whole, I lean very slightly toward a winter that's a bit harsher than last year. We had below normal snowfall last winter. We did have that big icing event, but I do think the collection of things that are driving the weather this winter will lead it to one that's maybe more like the previous winter than last year, where we did have lower snowfall. We had more snowfall in the winter before last. And I think that overall we're kind of just tilted slightly toward being a little bit worse than last winter. And with a couple of key, bullet points, sub bullet points there, an increased frequency of clipper systems. These storms that form in southern Canada and kind of move across the Great Lakes and into the Northeast during January through March, and that can lead to kind of an increased frequency of snow and or ice. Not necessarily huge amounts, but kind of an increased frequency in the disruptive systems. So maybe more 2 hour delays, and if well timed, more snow days. So that's something that I'll be keeping an eye on for kind of the second half of the winter season. And number two, harsh winter weather may occur in spurts and quickly be followed up by milder weather. So it's not likely to be kind of a winter for the record books, but there may be periods of time where it's quite winter like, and it's a bit harsh and cold and snowy. But with climate change, kind of the bigger picture there is we're warming up overall. Our average temperatures are rising. So that makes kind of these cold temperature extremes less common, less frequent, and generally less intense as well. Doesn't mean that we can't get them from time to time, but having kind of a winter of old, if you will, from decades ago, where 1995, 96, for instance, that one that I mentioned earlier, those are harder to get now. Doesn't mean that we can't get the polar vortex winter, which was 2014, 15. They still happen, but they just happen less frequently. And I don't see this winter as being one that is going to be, um, you know, memorable for being kind of the coldest or snowiest ever for us. But there is a wild card factor. What you see for number five, we have very warm ocean temperatures in the Atlantic Ocean, so just offshore of the Northeast, and that's fuel for winter storms. Um, so just one blizzard, could change kind of the whole complexion of a season. It can throw kind of a seasonal outlook totally out the window if you get one of those. And with that warmer water, I think the odds are a little bit elevated for one of those bigger storms. But we need all of kind of the puzzle pieces to come together at the right time. Cold air, moisture, and enough to kind of trigger the formation of a storm to get one of those. And it may be the case that those puzzle pieces just don't come together as frequently kind of enough this winter. But I put it in there as a wild card factor because it is definitely, I think, one worth watching this winter. We did have fewer kind of nor'easters, as they're called, coastal storms last winter. I wouldn't be surprised if we again kind of had fewer of those storms this coming winter. But if one does come together, it could drop a lot of snow because of those warm seas in particular. All right, so I think we should dig into some of maybe the finer details of the outlook. So I thought it would be kind of interesting to look at historically when we get our first inch of snow in the Hudson Valley, kind of putting some brackets on dates when we can expect the first snowfall. So I went back and looked at snowfall data from Poughkeepsie starting in 1931, and I took all of the years and I made this box plot, which is basically a way to show a distribution of things, and in this case, the distribution of the first inch of snowfall by date. And what I found was that on average, the Hudson Valley's first inch of snow typically occurs sometime between November 23rd and December 16th. So that's basically, 1 to about 2 months from now, with the median date being December 4th. So that first week of December is, on average, when you look at the last 90 years or so, the first snowfall occurs during that first week of December. But what this box plot shows is that it can happen, as you kind of see on the far kind of left, it can happen as early as the end of October, which we saw in 2012. Don't think we're going to see that this year. In fact, I think there could be a bit of an Indian summer at the end of October, to as late as about January 20th, which is shown all the way on the right side of the plot by that greenish diamond. And last year and the year before that, we were waiting until mid to late December for our first week of snow. So first inch, excuse me, of snow. So the last couple of winters have had later than normal first inches of snow. So once again, we tend to experience our first winter snowfall the first week of December. So if you are competing in one of those contests for the predicting the first inch of snow or the first snow day, you can use this information to your advantage. Now, how do I kind of come up with the predictions for winter? There's a couple of different ways, but generally speaking, in order to predict the future, we must first learn from the past, and that can be applied in many different things, not just weather. So what I do is I compile something called analog years. Analog years, simply, are years in the past that have climatic similarities with the present year. And these years are determined by looking at patterns in the ocean and the atmosphere all over the world. And then I put all those years together and I take an average across the winter months to kind of understand the different risks that each of the months may have, which way they might go. And I do that here for snowfall, which is what you see in the table. In that table, on the left are all of the analog years, and then from left to right are the different months of the year from November through April. And those numbers mean how much snow has fallen compared to normal for each of those months. So exactly normal would be 100%. Anything above 100% would be above normal, and anything below 100% would be below normal. So what we can see is that if we look across these analog years, that the average for November and December is about 80% of normal snowfall, so a little bit below average. But in those individual years, there were a couple of Novembers that had well above normal snowfall. In fact, two. So 2016-17, that would have been November 2016, and November 1995. Two of those years had well above normal snowfall. The rest had below normal. In December, it's a mixed bag. We had four of those analog years that had above normal snowfall and four that had below normal snowfall. But the average of November and December is about 80% of normal, so a little bit less snow than normal on the whole for November and December during those analog years. Now, it gets interesting during January because you can see here that 6 out of the 8 analog years shown had above normal snowfall during January. And the average was 130% of normal. And January's average snowfall is somewhere between 10 and kind of 15 inches in the Hudson Valley. So, if we are doing better than that, then, you could be talking about, 15 to 20, 25 inches of snow. So we really see that strong signal coming out for the month of January compared to some of the other winter months. So that's definitely a month to watch. Now, February goes in a bit of a different direction. In fact, only one out of these 8 years had above normal snowfall in February, and the rest had below normal for an average of only about 60% of normal. And February, again, is our snowiest month on average. So if we had less snow during February, that might make it hard for us to have, a winter season that overall had above normal snowfall. But then Mother Nature says, hold up. And as we've seen in the last couple of winters, it doesn't end, once we hit March. The odds or chances for snow have continued in recent years right into March and sometimes even April. And noting that this winter overall may have an elevated chance for some of those spring, kind of March, April snow events. So here there are 4 out of the 8 years that had above normal snowfall during March, and 2 of those years had 200% of normal, so twice the normal amount. And even April, a couple of these years had snow, and some serious snow at that. So I think overall, if we were kind of building a risk profile for the winter ahead, it couldn't be ruled out that we get a big snow in November or December, but the odds are slightly against it. Then the odds increase for bigger snow events in January, decrease a little bit in February, and then increase once again as we head toward March. So that's kind of the month to month breakdown, for the season ahead. I still would say we'll need to keep just a real close eye on November and December, but I'm not sure there's going to be quite enough moisture around. I think there will be some cold spells, but does that cold air kind of come together with the moisture to create the storm? And that might be what we're kind of up against early in the winter season this year. Now, how is a long range forecast made? Okay, so no, we're not looking at the woolly bear caterpillar, although it's an interesting story. And the one here you see on screen was taken by my dad in Montgomery just earlier this week. And the story goes, it's actually, this is a well-known kind of piece of I guess folklore that originated, believe it or not, in the Hudson Valley at Bear Mountain State Park in the 1940s and 50s, when there was a doctor coming up from New York City, I think vacationing with his wife in the fall season, and for 10 years he documented how much brown was basically on the caterpillar, and then correlated that with caterpillars that had more brown. Those winters ended up less harsh, and the ones that had less brown had the harsher winters. So if we just and he admitted that it wasn't the most scientific study, but it is fun and it is interesting and it's well known across the U.S. And it did develop right here in the Hudson Valley, and I didn't actually know that until I started to look into it just a week or two ago when these pictures of the caterpillar started floating in. So if we indulge for a moment and look at this caterpillar, it kind of has, I would say, a fair bit of brown, and it seems to match number 4 in the picture, which means a winter that begins harsh and ends mild. Which maybe for temperatures, maybe that'll work out. But I think we'll get maybe more snow on the back half of the winter rather than early on. So maybe it gets half credit, but this will be one to keep an eye on. We'll see who's better at long range prediction, Ben or the caterpillar. So we'll revisit that later in the winter. But how long range forecasts are actually made? So it comes from something called ocean memory. So you'd be probably wondering, wow, like I didn't know that the oceans have a memory, they have a mind, and in fact, they kind of do. Not like we do, but it's the idea that the ocean conditions, such as ocean temperatures, persist or last over long periods. They're slow to move. And that slow moving nature of ocean temperatures is a major source of climate predictability in the months ahead. So, what I do in my spare time on the weekends, and delaying Kate and I going out on the weekends, much to her chagrin, is the looking at all of these climate maps. So what I'm showing you here is the average ocean temperature compared to normal over the last 30 days from mid-September into mid-October. Blue colors indicate colder than average ocean temperatures. Red colors indicate warmer than average ocean temperatures. And those different boxes indicate different parts of the world that climate scientists focus on to understand the potential for basically long range forecasting. So just as a reminder, if you can see my little cursor, I'm kind of hovering over the northeast U.S. So that's where the Hudson Valley is in the state of New York, right over my little red dot there. And as you can see, these boxes are thousands of miles away in some cases. So it really goes to show that weather happening in one part of the world can really influence things that happen in our neck of the woods, kind of like the butterfly effect in a way. The butterfly flaps its wings in Bali, in Indonesia, in Australia, and it somehow trickles back to the United States, the Hudson Valley. So we have a couple of things here that are important, as we call them, climate drivers for the winter ahead. We have this tongue of blue in the Pacific Ocean, extending westward of South America. This is called La Nina. La Nina is part of the wider El Nino Southern Oscillation, a mouthful, a technical term there that refers to this important climate driver in the Pacific Ocean. And when we have La Nina conditions, that can influence the climate, not just in the Pacific, but right around the world. So with La Nina, we tend to experience more polar intrusions from the polar jet stream in the United States, and that can bring those colder air masses down into the northern U.S. and potentially bring snow with them as well.